Hello. Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I'm Brandon Tessers. I am a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for very, very many reasons. I run a therapy and coaching practice called Effective Artistry. That's our fun logo up there in the corner. We do individual and couples therapy. That sounded like I was saying individual couples therapy is a thing. Individual therapy, couples therapy. We are right now in the process of putting together our first group for group therapy. In this case, it's a parents group focused on parents who are wanting to learn more about neurodiversity and how it impacts them and their children. We also do executive functioning coaching, individual coaching. We have workshops and blah, 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 and all kinds of fun stuff. So that's what we do. And what we're doing here, this is Not Therapy Hour. It's just an open conversation. I'm here to have a chat. Any of you who are here to have a chat as well. Many of you are here just to watch, and that's great. Any of you who are here who want to watch and contribute, whatever people put in the chat, that shapes the conversation. What I say impacts you, what you say impacts me. So I like to describe it that way as opposed to Q&A, although it can be Q&A for sure. And I always come up with a topic, or today I guess it's more of a, not so much a topic as a process, I don't know, so that we have stuff to talk about until and unless anybody in the chat wants to take us in a different direction, but we can go wherever. It doesn't have to stay centered around the topic that we're putting out there at the beginning. I think that I've said all of the relevant stuff. If you're in the chat and you chat, I try not to say people's names. If you're watching through Facebook and you chat, it would be attached to your Facebook account, YouTube, your Google account, and Twitch, your Twitch account. So keep that in mind as far as this stuff gets recorded and saved on those things and are available to watch later, and comments stay on there as well. So, don't say anything that you don't want people to be able to see that you said. Or if you do, go make a Twitch account or a throwaway fake account on one of the other ones so that it can't be attached to you. I think that's mostly it. So what we're doing today, I've mentioned this actually a few times in the past, and I have my struggles with executive functioning. I don't know how I would do this if I didn't. Not that I think you have to have executive functioning struggles in order to be helpful. What is a great way to deal with language that triggers others? That's a good question, and I'll come back to that in a second, and that will be helpful. Hi, Dad. So I was saying that by way of, we have been developing and getting ready to start training a cohort of executive functioning coaches, and we're in the last stages of finalizing that. We've got 5 of the 6 people locked in, and we're doing interviews for the 6th spot right now, which I think I've said in the past on the stream, but if I haven't, I'm saying it now. Anybody who's interested in something like that, let us know. Contact us. There's still time to potentially be involved with this particular go around, but if not, we'll be doing more of these in the future. So in preparation for that, what we're doing is putting down on paper, I guess, in a way, terms and definitions and metaphors and concepts and interventions and processes and all that kind of stuff that we utilize. We're trying to take that all, most of which is in my head and on these streams and in the heads of the therapists and coaches who work here, and put it down in a database that people can access, in particular the coaches that are going to be training. But it's not like I jealously guard these state secrets. This stuff is available for people who are interested to know about it. And that's what we're going to start with today. Is we've been putting together that, we've been starting some of those glossaries into, I don't know what you want to call them, and we're just going to be working on that and defining terms and all that fun stuff, including I'll be answering questions or whatever from the chat, like this one. What's a great way to deal with language that triggers others? But with a focus on defining how I find that language, the specific terms and metaphors and whatever, to be useful so that we can record it. So I'm going to come back to that question, but I also need to read this one out loud because it's in the private chat and I'll forget about it. The one I was supposed to start with is the difference between not having motivation or not being productive, more direct understanding of the two and how they work together. May think they're being productive, but motivation to complete tasks is a struggle, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. All right, so we'll start with the one in the chat because that's how we do this. What is a great way to deal with language that triggers others? It depends. And if you're here, Dad, please give me some clarification. What do you mean there? Do you mean how do you handle other people when they get triggered by language that you use that you didn't know would trigger them? Do you mean how do you communicate with other people so that the language that you use, you can continue to use it without triggering them? How do you eliminate that language from your vocabulary when dealing? What specifically are you talking about? And I'll talk about things unless you clarify for me. So one, language is an important word, and then we'll talk about trigger. Language is one of the I was going to say few words that I do this with, but I don't actually know if it's few. I try not to do this. Language is a word that has a clear and consistent and common definition that is a good and useful and valuable one. And I also use it to mean a slightly different thing. And maybe that's something I should change. I don't know. Give me feedback. But language, the like common definition of what language is. How do I modify my language while maintaining authenticity? Okay, I will clarify that. Thank you. The definition that pops into your head of language is the common one. Language meaning English is a language. A language is a shared set of symbols, meaning that some group of people, more than one, some group of people have collectively determined together that this sign and symbol is representative of this concept. Because what's inherent to language, what makes something language, is that we're making connections that are not inherent to the actual sign or symbol itself. Meaning, if I say the word fire, that's just a series of sounds that I'm making. If you don't speak English, it means nothing to you. It evokes no concept because the word has no inherent connection to the thing that we are evoking, the thing we are referencing when we say the word fire. But if we learn to connect those two things, the sounds that make up the word fire and the concept of fire, which obviously can mean different things, partly I'm talking about different definitions, but also even if we're both talking about a campfire, it means different things to an individual person. So yeah, it's a codified set of symbols that is shared by a large group of people is like the official definition. I tend to use language to mean signs and symbols because signs and symbols I feel like is more difficult for people to connect to the concept I'm sharing. So when I'm talking about language, usually I'm talking about either the language that an individual person uses, the signs and the symbols that they have made connections to concepts and what concepts those things are connected to, or language that I and a client or I and somebody have developed together. We have a shared language. There's some really interesting theories behind some of this stuff, and I don't know if that's worth going into, but basically there are different camps in like the world of linguistics about language and particularly internal language. Some people believe that we have a universal internal language. It's been called mentalese by some people, well, one in particular, but I forget his name, that we're all using the same set of internal language. Other people, and I fall into this second camp, believe that everybody's set of internal language is different. And there can be two camps because we could never know. How are we going to say? Anything could be explained by either way. It's just what you find more useful. So yeah, that's what language means for me, is a thing that is connected to something else, not intrinsically, but because we have deliberately and consciously made a connection there. And I think that is actually important in helping you with this question. How do we deal with language that triggers others? Because what is triggering to people, and I'll define that term in a little bit, but what is triggering to people is you're using a word that has different connections to them than it does to you. And if you're unintentionally triggering someone else, It's because the connections that they have with that word are not only ones that you don't have, they're ones that you didn't foresee, that you didn't know or guess that they might also have. If you're intentionally triggering somebody, then it's the opposite. You are guessing. You're either aware of the connections that they have with that word, that symbol, or you're making guesses about the fact that it's connected to things. So trigger in that sense, and trigger is a word that was mostly developed and utilized by trauma-informed therapists. I don't know if it was started with therapists, but trauma work is where trigger comes from. The idea being that if someone experiences something traumatic, that later on, if something happens, if they become aware of something, either from their environment or something is evoked in their cognitive space, their awareness, that it connects them back to the traumatic event or experience or, set of ongoing experiences. So in the initial usage, it's triggering a flashback, that it's putting someone into a state where they're having a traumatic flashback. Of course, it's grown as language does to mean a lot more than just that. Different people use language differently. And of course, people will also argue about correct and incorrect usage, but the reality is it's used the way that it's used, whether we think that that's correct or incorrect or not. But at this point, trigger mostly is used by people to mean a thing happened that evoked some kind of negative emotional or cognitive response in a person. That whether or not I connect it to a specific traumatic experience, whether or not I am triggered into a flashback or into fight or flight or whatever particular, it doesn't necessarily need to meet those criteria based on how people generally are using the word. It's just that I became aware of something, and in response to my awareness of that thing, I am now in an emotional or psychological space that I don't enjoy and don't want to be in. And there's a reason that some people don't like that definition of that term, because that's pretty close to stimuli, right? That anything of which I become aware will impact me. Trigger just usually means that we're saying it's impacting us in such a way that we are now in a bad emotional or psychological state. And different people will put a different kind of bar on that of like how bad the response has to be in order for it to be considered a trigger. So what is a great way to deal with language that triggers others? Well, like I'm doing right now, and like I always recommend to people, if it's an option, depending on who you're talking to, it might be that there's a specific person that some language is triggering for them, or it might just be a general, oh, this word is in my vocabulary and sometimes it triggers people and I want to eliminate it from my vocabulary. In the first case, it's about communicating with the person, finding out what is the experience for them, what was brought up when you used that word. What does that word mean to them? What connections does it have to them? And of course, that is difficult to do and potentially dangerous to do because it is a triggering word. So exploring it, asking them to discuss it with you can bring up dangerous and unpleasant things for them. So it's not always an option, and you want to be very careful and clear about the fact that you're not wanting to explore anything beyond what a person is safe and comfortable with. And of course, you can look at putting together a context, an environment in which they are more safe and therefore more ready and able to explore a thing. That's a lot of what's happening in trauma-informed therapy, is creating a space and a situation that is so safe to a person, perceived as safe, not just actually safe, but perceived by them as being safe, that they can explore things that are happening or may happen in the future that they have connected for whatever reason to the traumatic experiences of the past, in an effort to de-link those things, to take whatever the triggering thing is. Say you had a traumatic experience in a room with walls that were painted red, and now every time you walk into a room where the walls are painted red, and yes, this is a reductive example, it triggers a traumatic experience for you. Well, theoretically, the fact that the walls are painted red is not actually correlated with whatever the traumatic experience was. And that's why you're considering it a traumatic response, because it's not actually useful to you anymore. You're responding to the red walls in a way that you don't find necessary or practical or useful. it's disproportionate or painful or costly. So we want to be able to delink those things, but doing that means exploring the connection that was made with whatever it was that happened in the past. And that can only happen in safety. So that's a lot of what happens in trauma-informed therapy. So that can be helpful if you're talking about a specific person in specific language. In particular, what does the word mean to you is a very important and helpful conversation to have. Because quite often that's the issue, is how different people are translating the word. The not the easiest way to modify your language, but the easiest way to make it so that after going through the process, your language will be modified from that point forward without you needing to pay as much conscious attention to it, is to do that, to become aware of what another person specifically interprets a word to mean. I've been using the word trauma a lot in the last 5 or 10 minutes, right? That word means different things to different people. And so sometimes someone's going to say, man, that test was traumatic. And somebody else is going to be very upset and offended by that, because traumatic to them has a specific meaning that doesn't apply to the test that you just went through. And they think you're making light of whatever, right? So if we interpret, or if we expand and explore what people are interpreting out of it, then you can change your language, because the point of language is to communicate with somebody else, if we're talking about shared language. And you did not intend, theoretically, to trigger them. Otherwise, you wouldn't be asking this question. You didn't know that it would cause that experience for them. Now you know, and it's given you incentive to change the language. It will be easier if you know more specifics about it. Because I would not, for example, if I'm talking to someone from the United States, I would not refer to soccer as, I'm sorry. Well, there we go. I'm from the United States. We call it soccer. I wouldn't call it football. If I'm talking to someone from Europe, I would try to remember to call it football, and they would try to remember that if I called it soccer, to translate. And if they called it football, I'd remember to translate, right? But if I know that, not everybody knows that different words are used for the same concept there. So if I don't, I'm going to just say football. And if they and they don't know that I use it differently, they're going to translate that in their head to mean what I would think of as soccer. I'm losing track of my own metaphor here. But if I know what after an experience of that and a miscommunication that caused a problem for the two of us, if we connect and clarify what the miscommunication was, then moving forward from that point, I'm going to be more aware that I don't have to consciously tell myself, don't say football, say soccer. I don't even remember what I was saying anymore. I will just automatically start to use the word because I'm focused on them and the impact I'm having on them. As an experiment right now, say anything at all, literally. But the only rule is that you have to consciously consider and choose every single word that you use. You're not allowed to say any word that you have not consciously thought of prior to saying it. All right, I'm going to say that was long enough for people to do it. If you did it, first of all, it's annoying and taxing and draining. It takes a lot of focus. Second of all, your speech there was not fluent. It did not sound like what your speech normally sounds like. What I'm trying to point out with that is that you don't actually consciously consider the specific words that you use. At some point, when you learned the language, when you made the connection between the sign and the thing to which it is referencing, and I'm using that language specifically because calling it a referent or calling it what is signified is a meaningful distinction to people who look into this stuff. But to the concept which it is intended to evoke, right? In order to make the connection initially, you had to consciously form that connection. After that, it's there. It's like learning any skill. You have to pay a lot of conscious attention, put effort, deliberate effort into doing something originally. And over time, you put less and less and less. When we're communicating, we're not focused on the words that we're saying. We're not even focused on the concepts we're trying to share as we're sharing them. We might do that in advance. And sometimes we are while we're doing it, but that's bad communication. We could talk about that. We're focused on the other person, the person to whom we are communicating, the impact we want to have on them. I'm watching, I'm paying attention, perceiving you to get a sense of whether or not I'm getting across to you what I'm intending to get across to you. And the way that I evaluate whether or not I'm getting it across to you is I'm evaluating your behavior, the things that you do and that you say, and making a determination about whether that stuff, the stuff that you're doing and saying, seems to me to be impacted by, reliant upon the thing I was saying to you. So it's not about the word, it's about the impact. If you learn that a specific word or set of words is impacting a specific person in a way that you don't intend it to, then you'll automatically start to shift. You'll make more mistakes earlier on and then get better and better as time goes on. And it will go more efficiently if you do that work, if you have the conversation with them, if it's safe and possible. In particular, because what you'll be doing is clarifying what you were trying to get across. And in order to clarify what you were trying to get across, you'll have to use different language to explain the concept other than the one that you already used. You can't say fire and then they think you're talking about someone's employment being terminated when really you're talking about the flames and the heat and the light that comes from fuel burning or whatever, right? If I say fire meaning that second one and they interpret it to mean the first and we clarify, thank you. Sorry, I got distracted by the comment. In order to clarify, you have to do what I just did. I can't say fire and they say, oh, you mean like, someone losing their job? No, fire. I can't just keep saying the same word over and over. Sometimes that'll work if they only know two definitions and that you just need to eliminate which one is not the right one. But otherwise, you have to use different language. And by the time you've done that, you've now already understood and come up with other language that communicates the concept to the person. So you know what other options you have there. If that makes sense. If you mean the more general sense, and people often talk about this, right? Like trying to eliminate a word. For example, I have made a deliberate effort to eliminate the word stupid from my vocabulary because of things that evokes in people and concepts that it reinforces, even if an individual that I'm talking to or all the people I'm with at the moment don't have a bad reaction to the word itself. I don't like what the word comes from, and I don't like the concepts and the structures and the systems that it is in service to. So I try to eliminate it. If that's the case, then you want to come up with other options to convey what you're trying to convey. And the best thing that you can do there, and it's, put as much effort into this as seems worth it for you, is to explore all the use cases of the word you're trying to replace and come up with different words that can be used in each of those cases. So another example, crazy is a word that I have tried to eliminate from my vocabulary. Generally speaking, this is across the board. Trying to get yourself or anybody else to stop doing a thing by actively suppressing that thing is very, very cost intensive. It takes a lot of effort and focus, and you will slip up. Getting someone to stop doing a thing, yourself or somebody else to stop doing a thing, by offering a better option that is a replacement for the thing is much more efficient. It's not perfect and it'll happen right away without any, sliding back to the initial thing later on, but it's a lot more efficient, a lot easier to come up with a better option and then in the future use the better option than to just keep saying to yourself, nope, don't say that. Because then even if you do that, then you're still evoking the concept in people's minds, right? Like if I'm trying to stop myself from saying the word crazy and I start a sentence that I'm going to be using it in because I'm not consciously thinking about all my language when I start, oh man, you should have been there. It was totally, as soon as I do that, you start looking for the words that you think I might have used or might have been intending to use, which is A, something that is commonly used in the context, and B, somehow I would find it bad or problematic or worry that other people would find it bad or problematic. So you're going to pretty quickly just come up with a list. Even if you don't think of the specific word that I was thinking of, you're just going to run through a list of a bunch of problematic words that I might have used there. Otherwise, why would I have stopped myself, right? So I'm still evoking the concept. Instead, we look at the use cases. When do I use the word crazy? Well, I often use it as an intensifier to talk about an experience and how unpredictable or intense or difficult to explain or convey it was, right? That in the past I would have said, oh my gosh, you should have been there. It was crazy. In that case, I can say wild. Oh, you should have been there. It was wild. Sometimes I use the word to refer to somebody else's actions, right? That make no sense to me or that I disagree with or find abhorrent. That I'm going to say, like, I don't understand. He's just acting crazy, right? In that case, I probably wouldn't want to say wild. He's just acting wild. That conveys a different thing than what I'm trying to say. It doesn't convey the same sense of disdain and disagreement. So in that case, I might say he's acting foolishly or ridiculously, right? And so on and so forth. Because you can't come up with one word that will replace that word in all contexts. You have to find better replacements for each of the contexts. And you probably won't in advance be able to think of all the contexts in which you use the word, but you just think of as much as you can, and then you pay attention. And as you're going forward and you use it again, you'll say, oh, shoot. And you can quickly think, is that one of the ones where I had already come up with a replacement that I could have used? Or would the replacement, do I not have a good replacement there? And now I have a new thing to find a replacement for. Patrick Rothfuss has talked about this. He's struggling with words to use, and the best he's come up with silly. Oh, in regards to stupid. So again, people tend to get stuck on this because they're trying to come up with a word to replace the initial word in all contexts. And that's not going to work. Sometimes silly works. In fact, that's a very common word to use to replace stupid for people who are talking to children, regardless of whether they think similarly as I do and many people do for the word generally, that we'll say to kids silly, which, by the way, I think it's telling if there's a word that we're hesitant, generally speaking, many people are hesitant to use with or in reference to or around children. That's probably a sign that it's a problematic word that we want to explore when we're using it, even when kids aren't around. I would say curse words are an exception to that in a way, but separate thing. You can replace the word, but not the connotation. That gets really hard. Well, yes, and the thing that is helpful there is that your connotation of the original word isn't anybody else's connotation either. Connote, the verb connote in linguistics, I've been using the word evoke or whatever. Interpret, I often talk about. Connote means not what is the meaning of the word itself, and I'm blanking on the word that means that. Yeah, I'm blanking on it. Maybe somebody can find it. There's the meaning carried by the word. A connotation, connote, is connections that it has to other things that isn't the meaning of the word itself. So if I say fire, when we're using that example, the flame and the heat and all that kind of stuff, that is the meaning of the word. And I wish I could remember the one that is used in juxtaposition with connotation, but I can't right now. But when you say fire, denote, that's right, yes, denote. The meaning is what it denotes. The things to which it is connected for an individual is what it connotes. Connotes, I don't know how you pronounce that. I've only read it, actually. I've never heard anyone say it out loud, or at least I don't remember. When you say fire, when I say fire, every time I've been using it in this example, I every time think of campfire, which makes me think of camping or Boy Scouts or whatever. Those are connotations for me specifically. So replacing language, I think, is actually super helpful. That's why I'm putting all this effort. We are putting all this effort into defining these terms and using it in how we train people. It's why I do it so much in these streams and in my work with clients. Exploring and either changing, replacing language or developing additional language to be able to take something that you have viewed as one thing and split it into, now you can see it as two separate but related things, etc. Incredibly important. So this is an opportunity, right? Before, if you thought that stupid had a particular connotation, you're right about the connotation it has for you, but you don't know what connotation it has for other people, and you just don't think about it because it doesn't usually cause you a problem. But now that it's a problem and you're spending attention and awareness and energy and whatever considering it, it's a good opportunity to remind yourself, oh, you know what? I actually don't know what connotations it has for other people. That's why you're replacing it in the first place, is because it was not a problematic word for you until it became one. Almost definitely became one, because I can only think of a few exceptions. Maybe there's a lot, but in the moment I can only think of a few. Almost definitely became a problematic word for you because somebody else shared with you something that it connotes for them or for other people generally or commonly or frequently or sometimes, and that you don't like the connotation that you didn't know that it had because it didn't have it for you. But anyway, yeah, it's a lot easier to replace it case by case, and it is helpful to do that in advance. I think, so you're talking about maintaining authenticity. The specific word that you use has nothing to do with authenticity. And I know that might sound ridiculous to some people, which, by the way, ridiculous is one of my replacement words for crazy. That might sound ridiculous to some people because they're saying, no, there's a difference between if I'm saying I'm anxious versus I'm saying I'm irritated, or I don't know, whatever, worried, nervous, etc. And there is for you. But imagine that you were trying to communicate with someone who didn't speak English, who spoke a different language. Imagine you were bilingual and you were trying to communicate with someone in the other language. Let's say you speak Spanish as well. Does it make it any less authentic, the fact that you are using the Spanish words and grammar and syntax to convey the experience? No. So it doesn't actually matter what sounds you make with your mouth. It matters what you are doing in order to try and impact the other person. That's the authenticity piece. Is what you are doing and saying as closely linked as possible to what you are trying to convey, trying to evoke in the other person? That's authenticity. And people will get defensive about, oh, those are weasel words or this or that. That's their connotations. That's people imposing their definitions and connotations of language and words onto you. Ooh, what is my exact definition of authenticity? Ooh, good one. Okay, because I actually, that's from the private chat there. Thank you. Two things for authenticity. Number one, everything that I say and do has to be as closely linked, as accurately represented to my actual experience, actual thoughts, actual beliefs as possible. So that I would call honesty, right? That being dishonest or deceptive or lying or whatever version you want to use involves that I am deliberately making what I am saying and doing less representative of my actual experience. I'm deliberately saying something differently. If I believe something that's incorrect and say the thing that's incorrect, that's still, to me, honest. Incorrect, but honest. So that's number one condition for authenticity, is I am doing everything I can to make what I am evoking in your mind, the concepts I'm putting into your head, as closely representative as I can to what I'm actually experiencing. And number two, because that first condition doesn't cover what many people will call a lie by omission, right? That if I don't say anything, then I'm not lying, right? Even though I know they'd want the information and I know what it's implying to withhold it and blah, blah, blah. So number two is, of all of the things that I am aware that I could say, I say as much as possible of the things that I believe might be relevant or of interest to you. That's it. If in a given moment I kind of need to pee and also the things that you just said to me were really moving and beautiful, I don't have to say, listen, I am experiencing two things right now. What you just said is moving and beautiful, and also I kind of need to pee. That's not necessary to be authentic. And in fact, I think that would be inauthentic because it's more about your experience. Communication is about the impact you're having on the other person. So I'm filtering through of all the experiences that I'm having, of all the language I could use that does accurately represent my experience right now. I'm selecting the thing that seems most relevant to you. And I'm wrong all the time, but I'm doing my best. And I don't withhold anything deliberately that I think might be of interest to you. So I might not tell you that I need to pee, but only because I don't think you would care, not because I don't want you to think of me in a certain kind of way or react to me in a certain kind of a way. So I'm not going to tell you every single thing about my experience. But if I consider telling you a thing, sharing a thing with you, if I consider that you might find it interesting or relevant, then I'm going to share it to the best of my ability, because I might think of 7 things all at once and I just can't get to them all, right? So there's limits. But that's my definition of authenticity, that I am doing my best to evoke concepts in your mind, have an impact on you that accurately matches up with my experience. And I am telling you everything. I'm telling you as much as I am capable of telling you about anything that I find potentially relevant or interesting to you in this moment. The in this moment part is important there too, because even though I might think that you might find it interesting that I used to know all of the 150 original Pokemon by name and who evolved into what, right now, you're probably not super interested in that, or at least not as much as in me talking more about these things. We bring up the topic of motivation and productivity and how they work together. Yes, okay. So this is about language too. And oh wait, there's another comment I want to read. A lot of trouble with words like anxiety and trauma because they mean really different things to different people, and that's different from the DSM definition, which is different from how it's used within the practice, and up-to-date understanding, which is different from my interpretation and experience. Hey, when you hear that ending song enough times, I don't know. Oh, the Pokemon song. Okay. Motivation and productivity. Right? That's what I was. Yes. Topic of motivation and productivity and how they work together. Okay. So there are certain words that we would call constructs. It's not the word that is the construct, but the word is a label, a sign that points to what we call a construct. A construct is an idea of a thing, a story about a thing, a concept of a thing, a way of thinking about or considering or approaching a thing that is theoretically useful, but also that we made it up. That's why it's called a construct. We constructed it, we built it. So it serves a purpose. We wouldn't have constructed it, we wouldn't have made it if it didn't serve some purpose. And it's also not directly observable, because if it is, we wouldn't have had to build the concept of it. And in this realm, in therapy and coaching and psychology and all of this stuff, constructs are really vital. I would say the vast majority, even psychology is itself a construct. The idea of what psychology is not something we can observe. It is useful to talk about it as though it is a real thing, but that doesn't mean we can actually observe it unless we define observable things to mean it. Anyway, motivation is a construct. We invent constructs to serve purposes. They are valid and useful, but they are not observable. Motivation is a construct, and it is a construct we came up with to help us understand, to come up with answers to the questions, why is that person doing that thing or not doing that thing, or doing that thing in that way to that extent or not, or to this extent rather than that extent, including myself can be that person. Why am I doing or not doing this thing? And questions like, what can I do to get that person to do that thing, right? How do I motivate them? So in that sense, motivation is a word that covers literally anything that impacts a person doing or not doing a thing that either they themselves or somebody else has determined that would be good for them to do, or at least potentially good for them to do, right? I am not concerned, for example, about motivation when I say, oh, I am not playing the violin. I don't say, oh, I'm struggling with the motivation to play the violin. It's just not a thing I have intended to do, and nobody's asked me to do it. So the fact that I'm not doing it is not in any way problematic, and it doesn't need an explanation. So motivation is an explanation. And like laziness, which I think is a sibling term to motivation, it's an answer that I don't find typically to be very useful, even though it is accurate, because we have defined it to be accurate. Meaning, I intended to do a thing and I didn't do the thing. Why? I can always say because I'm lazy or because I lacked motivation. I intended to do a thing and then I did the thing. Why? I can always say because I was motivated to do the thing. So they're accurate because that's what those words mean, but they're not typically very useful because they don't carry a lot of meaning. They don't carry a lot of value. Literally, anything I intend to do and don't do, I could say is a lack of motivation. Anything I intend to do and then do, I can say is motivation. So it can't really be that specific of a term. It can't point me to that much actual information. And therefore, it's not typically very useful. In fact, it's actually a problematic term, I find more often than not, because it's what I call a sticky answer, which is an answer that is theoretically accurate, but unhelpful. The common example I use for that all the time is, I'm so tired. Okay, I don't like this experience and I want it to be different. So automatically my brain is going to consider what is it that might have happened that has resulted in me being tired and that I could therefore change so that I won't be tired in the future. And I'm going to think, yeah, I didn't sleep enough last night. I'll just go to bed early tonight and that way I won't be tired tomorrow. It's a theoretically accurate answer. And then at night, if I go to bed early and it works, great. But if I don't go to bed early and I'm tired again the next day, then, well, I know what the answer is. I just need to go to bed early. It's just, I didn't do it, but tonight I will. And then if I don't, same the next day. I never consider whether something else might be worth doing because I have an answer, and the brain is a cognitive miser. It's presented with a problem, it comes up with a solution. But if that solution is theoretically accurate, it makes sense to me, it's logical, and a sticky answer for a given individual may or may not be actually accurate if it were put into place or not, although we'll never know because they're not putting it into place. It doesn't matter. It matters that they think that that's the solution. The brain is not going to spend any more resources considering other potential solutions when it already has one. I know what I need to do. I need to go to bed early. If somebody else says, hey, have you tried taking some vitamin D? Nah, I just need to go to bed early tonight, right? So motivation and laziness, they're sticky answers. They're answers that are theoretically accurate, but unuseful, and therefore block people from looking further. Almost everybody that comes to work with us here will say some version of either I'm lazy or I struggle with motivation, which means that there's something that they were intending to do and didn't do, typically in a pattern, a consistent, like lots of things or one thing in particular over and over. And the reason that they've identified as the variable that's causing the problem is motivation. So they've done a lot of work trying to figure out what motivation is and how to change it and et cetera. And it hasn't worked because motivation is a descriptor of something after the fact. It's not actually a thing. If I intend to do a thing an hour from now, you will not know until an hour from now when I've either done it or not done it. You won't know whether I'm motivated or not. I can't say right now I'm motivated to do it because then if I don't do it in an hour, that wasn't a true statement. So it's not predictive. So that's what motivation, the word motivation. If I think the term laziness is more or less problematic, how would you explain to someone who considers themselves lazy? What would the right language be? So as always, I'm not trying to take away a word because a word is useful. Like I was saying, right? We don't come up with and use these words for no reason. It does something for a person. So I'm not trying to take it away. I'm just trying to get it clearly defined to be what it is. Because a person, if they say that they're lazy, I'm not going to say, no, you're not, because that's not a thing. I'm going to say, what do you mean by lazy? And it may be that when they say lazy, what they mean is tired. And that's a thing that we can do something about. So I'm not going to assume what connotations the word or even what the word denotes for them, actually. I'm going to say, what do you mean by that? And if for them it is one of these filler words that doesn't actually help them solve the problem, then when I ask that question, they won't be able to answer it. I don't have to prove to them anything. What do you mean lazy? I just mean like, not, struggling to do things that I don't really want to do. Oh, okay. Can you help me understand how that's different from just not wanting to do a thing? Because doesn't not wanting to do something mean that you would avoid doing the thing if possible? So what's the difference? I don't know. It just means, You just keep asking questions until they either can define it in a way that is useful, or they come to understand that it's not a useful term for them in that particular instance. And then you come up with something else together. And what other words you might use in place of it depends on what it is that's happening and who they are and what words mean to them, right? So I would describe, if I thought the term laziness was problematic to a person, or generally, I would describe it the way that I just did, which is to say it's a useful term in that it is an easy answer to the question of why is a person not doing something which it seems as though they would benefit from doing, that they want to do or should do or would be rewarded for doing. There's good reason for them to do the thing, they're not doing it. The reason they're not doing it, there are reasons, and it depends on the thing and the context. Yeah, maybe it is that they're too tired. Maybe they don't know how to do it. Maybe whatever, a billion different things that are specific to that thing in that context. But I can always say lazy, which means that it's always an easy and useful answer, because it just makes it so I don't have to think about it anymore. Just like when I'm tired, oh, I'll go to bed early tonight. As soon as I settle on that solution, I may still notice the tiredness. The problem itself doesn't go away, although I probably notice it less because the brain is a cognitive miser. And why would it dedicate more resources to observing details about a problem that I've already come up with a solution for? So I will notice it less, most likely. But even if I do, I won't then wonder what it is about me that made it so that this is happening. Why am I so tired? I already know, so I'm not going to ask that question anymore. Why are they not doing what they're supposed to be doing, what I asked them to do, what they said they wanted to do? Why am I not doing what I want to do? I don't know. What is it about me? What is it about them? What's the specifics? What can I change? Oh, they're lazy. Ah, okay. It doesn't enable me to do anything differently. Doesn't enable me to do anything differently, but except that it enables me to stop thinking about the problem. I don't have to help that person anymore because their only problem is that they're lazy, and that's not something I can do anything about. And even if I could, it's not my responsibility. It's their being lazy. That's what these placeholder terms are for, often, is just to give us answers to questions so we can stop thinking about them, even though they don't help. Blame is like this as well. Fault in human relationships is like this as well. Productivity. So in how we're going to use the term, and obviously I talk a lot about how people tend to use the term, but also how I think it should be defined. And I don't have a personal definition for motivation beyond everything that I just shared, because I very specifically avoid using that term. I don't want to define it to mean the desire to do a thing, right? Because if I do, and then I use it that way, people are going to go back to the sticky answers. Most distress not all distress that a person is caused by their own behavior is because there's a gap between what they intended to do or think they should do, or after the fact wish they had done, and what they actually do or did. So intention and desire, I want to separate. It causes a lot of stress for people when they say, I really want to do this thing, but I keep not doing it. What's wrong with me? I guess I don't want to do it. No, you do. The desire is separate from the action. Productivity typically is used by people to mean one of two things. Either, and I think this is the most common, honestly, but who knows? Either it means doing something valuable that I don't enjoy, right? That to be productive, I have to engage in work and grind, and it's something that I think is valuable and good to do, but unenjoyable. I'm going to call that productive. If I enjoy doing it, I usually won't call it productive. I won't say I'm being productive when I play video games, right? And or the other way that it's commonly used is to refer to that whatever you do results in something that is of use to other people, or potentially, I guess, to yourself in the future, right? That I have produced some effect, either a physical object that now exists, or a concept or a workflow or whatever, that I have had some impact which is of benefit to other people or to myself in the future. But we don't typically use it that way, because people, for example, when they engage in their hobbies, don't usually call that productive. I was writing a song on my guitar last night. They won't usually call that productive. Usually when they're saying productive, they mean like something they're supposed to do for work or whatever. And again, people don't explore the definition of what they mean productive. how you can often find, if you don't have a real definition for these terms, is ask yourself how you would know, right? Like, what counts as productive and not productive? Do I have a separate definition then for productivity? No, I usually, that one in particular, I want to explore how the client is using that term. I don't find it to be one that I usually want to teach them a different definition for. I just want to bring other people's awareness to how they're using the word. I would rather use other language. Sometimes I like to take existing language and redefine it in a way that's useful for us. Sometimes I just want to bring people's awareness to how it might commonly be used or how they're using it. If I was going to say what I think it technically means, I would say the latter, that it has some impact beyond the experience itself, which is valuable to other people or to myself in the future. I have produced some beneficial impact, but I don't use that in the way that I conceptualize the work and the experience, in that way. I explore it with people. So the relationship between motivation and productivity is primarily people identify that certain things they do count as productive and certain things that they do not count as productive. Generally speaking, they identify that things that are work or academic related count as productive. Things that are, chores around the house, things that are unenjoyable to do, but valuable to do in some way. That's what they're going to call productivity or productive. And motivation is an explanation for why I do or don't do a thing. So in other words, mostly when people are saying, I struggle being motivated to be productive, what they're saying is there are things that I don't like to do and don't want to do, but think are worth doing anyway. And I have a hard time. I don't do those things as often or as quickly or as easily or, promptly as I wish that I were. I wish, I intend to do them faster, sooner, more frequently, whatever, than I actually do. And I think that's a problem because I think those things are valuable to do, even though I don't like to do them. So it just completely wipes out the whole point of, do you enjoy to do them or not? What is the value that they actually have? Do they have the value that you think they have? Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes people will say, oh, it's productive to journal. Some people think it's productive to journal. Some people won't. For a given individual, it's about what impact it has on them, right? What is worth doing, because that's usually what people mean by productive. Because if we're just talking about impact, does playing video games have an impact on you? Yes. Does taking a nap have an impact on you that enables you to do different things and feel better and do things differently? Yes. But those things feel good to a person, so they don't typically call it productive. So mostly people with motivation and productivity are just saying, there are things that I think I should want to do, and I don't want to do them. What's wrong with me? As opposed to the idea, what I find more helpful here, and this, I'll do these real quickly. These are terms that I use talking about motivation and productivity a lot more. Either I'll talk about resource expenditure and what you can afford and energy and that kind of stuff, or one that I find very commonly useful is to divide enjoyment or of an experience of something into two categories. And I use the fun old Greek philosophy terms of hedonic and eudaimonic. Hedonic joy is something that is in and of itself enjoyable. The experience itself, regardless of anything that you've connected it to or not, is enjoyable moment to moment. So I eat something that tastes good to me. It doesn't matter whether I think that will also give me nutrition or not or whatever. The experience is enjoyable. And these things change from person to person. Something that brings me hedonic joy might not for you, and vice versa. Eudaimonic joy is something that the experience in and of itself is unenjoyable to me. It would mean nothing to me. In fact, I wouldn't want to do it. I would find no value in it, except that I have made a deliberate connection to something else. Like language we were talking about earlier. I made a connection between this thing that is happening and what it means, or what it will lead to, or what it implies about me. Or so, do I enjoy doing my homework? No, but I enjoy getting a good grade. I find that to be valuable, and I think that I need to do my homework in order to get the grade. So then, yes, I will find my homework eudaimonically joyful, but not hedonically. And there's an important thing in distinguishing those two things, but I don't think we have time. And I was reminded to be good about wrapping up at 2 today, so I will. I think that's a more useful way to talk about motivation oftentimes. Of course, it's different if we're talking about how do I motivate somebody else, right? So there's a difference between stuff that is hedonically joyful, which things can be both. Something can be hedonically. I enjoy this moment to moment. I just like talking, even if no one was here, even if it didn't somehow theoretically in my mind connect to potentially helping people or getting the word out about these thoughts or the business or whatever. I do believe those things. So it's eudaimonically joyful for me as well. But just the experience of it, I like talking about this stuff, you know? So that's the goal. We want to get as much that's as possible into our lives that are both things, because you need both. If you go a day or, you know, however you want to divide up time, if you go a certain amount of time without hedonic joy, you are drained and exhausted and miserable, even if everything you're doing seems important, but is difficult to do. That's unsustainable. It's draining. If you go a certain period of time with no eudaimonic joy, then you're bored and things feel pointless. Even if you're having nice, fun experiences, if you cannot in your head cognitively connect those experiences to something else that seems meaningful to you in some way, something that you desire, then that's when you get listless and aimless, or whatever you want to call it. What's the point of anything? So you do need both in some kind of a balance, different for different people. I hope I defined those terms well. Yeah, we're going to wrap up. I'm going to just really quickly read through these comments, but I don't even think I'll have time to say anything. Okay. Good comments, and I appreciate them. Thank you guys for participating. But yeah, I have to wrap up because it's 2:00. Thank you for being here. I will be here next week, same time, 1 to 2 p.m. Central Time, same place. Join me again. This is fun. Thanks, everybody. Bye.